The vacuum cleaner hummed softly in the east hallway, its sound blending with the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the main foyer. She guided it along the edge of the skirting board, her mind already halfway to the next task. It was always the same rhythm here. Mornings were for dusting and polishing the silver in the dining room, afternoons for scrubbing the kitchen counters until they gleamed. By the time the sun dipped low behind the trees, she would be collecting waste baskets from every room and hauling the trash out to the service bins behind the garage. The family liked order. Every cushion had its place, every glass was returned to the exact shelf it came from, and every evening, without fail, the trash was removed by 8 o'clock. She had worked in the house long enough to know their patterns by heart. The man of the house liked to stand by the tall library windows with a drink. At exactly 9, the woman preferred to take her tea in the rose garden just after lunch, and their children came and went with the air of people who never worried about what kept the lights on. She moved silently from room to room, lifting baskets, tying off liners, and replacing them with fresh ones from the supply closet. The black plastic bags rustled as she twisted them shut. She never gave much thought to what was inside. Most of it was the usual crumpled papers, discarded packaging, the remnants of expensive meals she would never taste. The staff were expected to dispose of it all without curiosity. Outside, the evening air was cooler than it had been all afternoon. She balanced the bags against her hip as she pushed through the side door toward the service drive. The bins stood at the far end, lined neatly in a row like silent sentinels. She tossed the first bag in, the hollow thud echoing faintly against the brick wall, then the second. It was a small satisfaction to watch the day's refuse vanish, one load after another, into the deep containers. The last bag was heavier than usual, but not enough to make her pause. She swung it into the bin, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned back toward the door. The light above the service entrance flickered, casting the shadows of the hedges across the gravel in uneven patterns. Inside, she could hear the faint clink of glassware being set for the family's late supper. It was just another night, the kind she had lived through countless times before, the kind where the work was steady, predictable, and unremarkable. She did not know that within days, that routine would shatter, that the quiet certainty of her schedule would be replaced by something else entirely. For now, she was only the maid, doing what she had always done, never thinking twice about the sealed black bags she carried out into the dark. The wind had picked up just enough to scatter dry leaves across the service drive, their edges scraping against the concrete in a faint, restless chorus. She stepped outside with the last load of trash for the night, balancing the black plastic bags against her hip, as she always did. The air was damp, carrying the lingering scent of rain that had passed earlier in the afternoon. She dropped the first 2 bags into the bin without a second thought, the hollow echo fading quickly. When she reached for the last one, her grip shifted automatically to account for its weight, and that was when she noticed it. This bag was heavier than any she had hauled in weeks, the strain pulling at her wrist in a way that made her pause. The plastic was stretched taut across strange, uneven shapes. It wasn't the lumpy, irregular feel of leftover food or discarded packaging. The weight inside shifted sluggishly when she moved it, as though something thick and solid rolled just beneath the surface. A faint smell drifted from a small gap in the knot, sharp and unpleasant, hitting her nose before she could turn her head away. It wasn't the ripe, familiar odor of kitchen waste, nor the sour tang of something spoiled. This was different, chemical, metallic, with a strange undercurrent she couldn't quite name. She froze for a moment, the bag hanging from her gloved hand, her mind weighing the decision automatically. Years of habit told her to toss it into the bin and be done with it. Whatever it was not her concern. She had learned that in this job, questions could turn into problems, and problems had a way of falling hardest on the people who asked them. But the smell lingered, curling into her nose until she could almost taste it. She lowered the bag to the ground, keeping her hands on the twisted plastic. The seams were stretched almost to their limit, the glossy surface catching the faint light from the overhead fixture. She gave it a gentle nudge with her foot, and the contents shifted again, slow, deliberate, as if it were one large object sliding inside. The prickle at the back of her neck sharpened. This was not ordinary trash. She glanced toward the door, half expecting to see one of the family or another staff member watching her. The doorway was empty, the house silent behind its walls. She straightened, her fingers tightening around the plastic as she decided. She set the bag aside, away from the bin, tucking it into the shadow between the wall and the storage shed. Her pulse was steady, but her mind was no longer on the rest of her tasks. The rest of the garbage was gone now, buried under the usual clatter of the bins closing. But that one bag waited in the darkness, heavy and silent, as though it knew she would be back before the night was over. The corridor behind the service entrance was lit by a single flickering bulb, its light pooling weakly on the cracked tile. She crouched with the bag in front of her, the cool air smelling faintly of rain and whatever sharp, strange scent had leaked from inside the plastic. Her hands, still in thin cleaning gloves, gripped the knot at the top. For a moment, she just stared at it, weighing the choice again, knowing that once she looked there would be no unseeing. She tugged at the twisted plastic, the knot loosening reluctantly under her fingers, the smell intensified, sharp enough to sting her nose. She peeled the layers back slowly, the sound of tearing plastic loud in the narrow space. The first thing she saw was paper shredded strips scattered like confetti, but not the harmless kind that came from a desk's wastebasket. These had been cut deliberately, some even burned along the edges. Beneath them were folders, their corners scorched and brittle, their labels half melted and unreadable. The blackened edges crumbled when she brushed them aside, leaving faint smears of ash on her gloves. A torn envelope slid free, its heavy paper marked with a government seal pressed deep into the flap. She recognized it immediately. She had seen the same kind of stamp on official notices posted in town. The tear down its center seemed almost violent, as if someone had ripped it open in haste, pulled out what they needed, and discarded the rest without care. Under the paper, the contents changed. She found a stack of photographs, each one grainy and tinted slightly blue, the kind of images taken from far away with a long lens. Faces were captured mid-step, in doorways, on sidewalks, unaware they were being watched. The edges of some photos were marked with dates and times, others with street names she knew. She fanned through them quickly, feeling her heartbeat rise. At the very bottom of the bag, catching the dim light, was something metallic. She reached for it, the cold surface smooth under her gloves. It was a small flash drive, plain and unmarked, the kind that could hold years' worth of information in its tiny frame. She turned it over in her palm, the weight deceptively light. Her pulse quickened. This was not the kind of trash anyone should have been throwing out with kitchen scraps. The shredded and burned documents, the surveillance photos, the government envelope, the flash drive, it all fit together into something dangerous. She pulled the bag closed again, her hands suddenly unsteady. The bulb overhead flickered once, briefly plunging the corridor into shadow. When the light steadied, she tucked the bag behind a stack of crates, out of sight. She did not know exactly what she was holding, but she knew enough to be certain it was not ordinary, and she knew that whoever had thrown it away would not want anyone finding it. She crouched on the cold tile of the service corridor, the flickering light overhead casting uneven shadows across the wall. The bag was already open, its strange contents spilling into her thoughts as much as onto the ground. One by one, she began to lay them out, careful not to smudge anything, touching the edges of the papers and photographs as little as possible. The smell of burnt paper lingered in the air, mingling with the metallic tang that clung to the bag. Her mind kept pulling her back to moments she had brushed aside before, late nights when the house should have been silent but wasn't, the low murmur of voices in the study, sometimes rising sharply enough to carry down the hall. Once passing the library, she had caught the man of the house gripping the phone so tightly, his knuckles were white, his voice rough as he hissed the word documents into the receiver. Another time, she had stepped into a room to find papers being swept into a drawer so quickly they caught on the wood, leaving one corner jutting out like a silent witness. She had learned not to linger when she saw the tension in their faces. Now, as the pieces lay before her, those fragments of memory settled into place. The shredded papers looked like they had been torn from larger files, their edges too straight for casual destruction. The scorched folders carried labels, partially legible snippets of words that meant nothing alone, but suggested something bigger when paired with what else she found. She turned over one of the grainy surveillance photographs and froze. On the back, written in a hurried scrawl, was a date from several months ago and a location she knew instantly. It was the same place she had seen on the evening news during a segment about a corporate fraud investigation. She remembered the anchor describing a scheme that funneled money through shell companies, the kind of thing that ruined lives far from the glass offices where it was planned. The news footage had shown a glass-fronted building with a gleaming lobby and the same street name she now held in her hands. Her pulse quickened as she looked at the faces in the photo. The man in the tailored coat, stepping into a black car, had been on television too, smiling faintly as reporters shouted questions he ignored. Another image showed him in conversation with someone whose face was half turned away, but the body language spoke of urgency, of secrecy. She glanced toward the closed door leading back into the main house, as if the walls themselves might be listening. The air felt heavier now, thick with the knowledge that she was looking at something dangerous, something that could not be explained away as household trash. This was evidence, or at least it looked like it, and the way it had been hidden in a tied overstuffed bag made her stomach tighten. Her eyes drifted to the small metal flash drive again, resting against the tile like a sealed mouth that might speak if given the chance. She did not know exactly what it contained, but the weight of its presence alongside the other items told her it mattered. And for the first time since starting this job, she felt the uneasy certainty that what went on in this house was not just private, it was something people would go to great lengths to keep buried. Her knees ached from crouching, but she stayed where she was, staring at the array of objects she had placed carefully on the tile. Every instinct told her to gather them up, stuff them back into the torn trash bag, and push the whole thing deep into the bin outside. This was not her life, not her fight, and the safest thing would be to erase her fingerprints from the moment and let it vanish into the landfill like it was meant to. But the folder edges were still curling in the draft from the door, the government seal on the torn envelope still catching the flicker of the light. The photographs lay face up, the faces in them sharp in her mind. That small flash drive sat like a stone in her stomach. The weight of what she had found made her chest feel tight, the air in the corridor too thin. The first idea that came to her was the most obvious: go to the police. But the thought was snuffed out almost as quickly as it formed. She remembered too clearly the sight of a uniformed officer stepping out of the library one evening, his cap tucked under his arm. Her employer had followed him to the door, clasping his hand with a smile that felt too deliberate. She had caught only fragments of their conversation, but the tone had been familiar, not official. It had been the sound of men who owed each other favors. If the police were already tied to the house in some way, going to them would be like handing the bag back to the person who had thrown it away. And she had no doubt that if they knew she had seen the contents, her life in that house, and maybe in the town, would change in ways she could not control. Her mind went to other options. She thought of the newspapers, but most of them would not print a story without running it past the same people she feared. The family's influence stretched far. But there was one place she kept circling back to: the local investigative news team. They had a reputation for digging deep, for chasing stories even when it meant angering people who were supposed to be untouchable. She remembered an expose they had done the year before, a corruption scandal at the city council that no one else had dared to publish. She could already picture the call, her voice low, asking for the right reporter, explaining in careful, vague terms that she had found something big, and that she could not talk to the police. She would need to arrange a meeting in person. They would need to see the documents, the photos, the flash drive. She did not even know what was on it, but her gut told her it mattered. She began to rewrap the items in the plastic, moving slowly, deliberately, so nothing shifted out of place. The decision was made, even if it terrified her. She would not put the bag in the bin. She would hide it until she could find a way to pass it on. Her hands worked in silence, but her mind was already rehearsing the words she would use, the care she would take. If she was going to do this, there could be no mistakes. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the trash bag now tied again and sitting at her feet. The room above the garage was quiet, except for the faint hum of the small heater in the corner. She stared at the phone on her nightstand for a long time before picking it up, rehearsing the first sentence in her head until she could hear it in her own voice. Her fingers dialed the newsroom number she had memorized earlier that day. Each ring felt longer than the last. When the line finally clicked, she lowered her voice, glancing at the closed door as if anyone might be listening from the hallway. She asked for the investigative desk. There was a pause, a shuffle, and then a man's voice came on, calm, professional, but with an alertness that made her believe he was already leaning forward in his chair. She explained quickly, choosing her words carefully, leaving out the name of the family, but describing enough to make it clear this was serious. She told him about the shredded papers, the burned folders, the government seal, the photographs, and the flash drive. She made sure to say she had not gone to the police. He did not interrupt her. When she stopped, the silence on the other end stretched for a moment, then he asked if she could keep the items secure and stay where she was until someone he trusted could get to her. He told her not to talk to anyone else about it, not to mention the call to coworkers or friends, and to make sure the bag was hidden somewhere no one would think to look. His tone was steady, but there was an urgency beneath it, a quiet recognition of the risk she was taking. She promised she would do exactly that. The call ended as abruptly as it began, the click of the line cutting through the stillness of her small room. She looked at the bag, the twisted knot of plastic sealing away everything she had seen. Moving quickly, she reached for an old wool blanket folded at the foot of her bed. She wrapped the bag tightly, layer over layer, until its shape was no longer obvious. She lifted the mattress with both hands and shoved the bundle deep under the frame, pushing it until it was flush against the wall. When she straightened, she moved to the window. From here, she could see the main house across the short stretch of driveway. The downstairs lights were still on, spilling warm yellow onto the gravel. Behind one set of curtains, shadows moved quick, purposeful, crossing back and forth as if the room's occupants were busy with something urgent. She stood there for a long time, watching the shifting shapes. The glass was cold under her fingertips. Somewhere inside, the people she worked for were still moving through their lives as if nothing had changed. But she knew that under her bed lay something that might change everything for them, and possibly for her too. It started with a single headline, one she saw in the paper stand at the corner store on her way back from buying cleaning supplies. By the afternoon, it was on every television in town. The same photograph she had handled in that dim service corridor now flashed across news broadcasts, cropped and labeled with captions that named politicians, corporate executives, and foreign banking contacts. The anchors' voices were taut with the gravity of it. An investigation had uncovered an international network for laundering money funneled through shell companies and hidden accounts. The documents, they said, had come from an anonymous source. She watched from the break room of the garage apartment, the small TV balanced on a rickety stand. The story unfurled in bursts of information, each one heavier than the last. The shredded papers had been painstakingly reconstructed, revealing contracts and financial transfers that were impossible to explain away. The scorched folders contained evidence of meetings, wire transfers, and internal memos. The flash drive held encrypted files that the newsroom's tech team had cracked open emails and messages between people who had spent years building walls to protect themselves. Her name was never mentioned. The reporters referred to the source only as a whistleblower, with close access to the material. Still, she could feel the ripple move through town. By the second day, the whispers had begun. A neighbor who never looked her way before now greeted her a little too warmly. At the market, two cashiers leaned toward each other when she passed, their voices low but their eyes following her. No one said it outright, but she could hear the shape of the words in their pauses. In the main house, life went on in a strained imitation of normalcy. The family had locked themselves into routines that felt too rigid, as if any deviation might expose a crack. She moved through her duties as she always had, keeping her face neutral, her pace steady. In the evening, she still walked out to the bins with the day's trash. The bags were lighter now, filled only with the usual debris of daily life. She tied them shut and tossed them in without looking back. The quiet knowledge stayed with her. She had seen the names in those documents, the balances in those hidden accounts. She had touched the edges of something vast and corrupt, something that reached far beyond the walls of this estate, and she had helped drag it into the light. At night, from her window above the garage, she could see the glow from the televisions in the main house. She imagined them watching the coverage, hearing the names of people they knew, perhaps even people they had thought untouchable, being read aloud alongside the charges. She wondered if they thought about the bag they had left for her to carry. She still rose each morning, put on her uniform, and followed the rhythm of the house. But the work felt different now. She no longer saw herself as just a maid collecting someone else's discarded things. She had once picked up a bag of trash and found the weight of an empire's secrets inside, and she had not let them stay buried.